Dozens of people flock to the accident scene. Friends or classmates of the victims stand stunned at the sight of the fatal crash, while others seem just curious. This was the scene here last night as rescuers cleared away the car that carried the 8 young people to their death. Police say around 11, the car went speeding out of control and flew 200 feet into the air. Today, a few pieces of broken metal at the bottom of this ravine are the only signs of the tragic crash.
When I was a student at Mid-Valley, of course, I graduated in 1997, it was talked about a little bit. Mr. Dempsey had always referenced it in his class, and he would always kind of do it around prom time, and his message to us was very simple. It's Friday, go have fun. But Monday morning, when I look at my roll book, I want to see you. When I look at that desk, I want to see you in that desk. And that message really stuck with me. And of course, it went dormant for a while. I went on to King's College to take history and education classes there. And to be hired at Mid-Valley was great. And then when I had the opportunity, Mr. Dempsey retired in 2012, he took his classes over. So as I'm going through his roll book, I'm like, okay, chapter 8, alcohol and substance abuse. And Mr. Dempsey had on there, Mid-Valley 8 lesson. So I called Mr. Dempsey up and I said, Mr. Dempsey, I'm going through your lessons here. Would you like to speak? Sure. And he came in and spoke to my students that day. And I know he made a lasting impression on them, just like he made an impression on me. Here's a guy who's retired coming back and talking to the students. And that day, when he came in 2012, it was 2013 at that point, because it was a 2012-13 school year, I always kind of felt so bad for what happened to those kids and that family. And it was something we didn't talk about here for a while. And I wanted to make things okay to talk about. The historian in me, being a teacher, went back online, did research, read articles, went to the libraries. And I just would never want to see anything like that ever happen to my students. That's my job. I'm a teacher. We're here to teach about books and stuff like that, but we're also here to teach life lessons to the kids too. And just in hearing Mr. Dempsey talk about some of the things that happened to the families and the pain that they suffered, I would never want to see that happen to anybody again. And that's kind of why I'm here. March 11, 2016 was the 35th anniversary of that accident, and we were able to reach out to all the families, and we had an assembly here. And I had direct connections with some teachers that spoke here, and they did a wonderful job remembering the memories of their loved ones. And I guess an individual went home and spoke to his mom about it, and she writes grants down at King's. And I really didn't want to do it, but looking at the quality of that video that we had from, you were at the assembly, right? It was great, and you can't recreate that raw emotion again. So she hooked me up with a Mid-Valley alumni named Scott Weiland, who is also a King's alumni. So it's kind of funny how me and Scott crossed paths here. And when I saw the opportunity to have the equipment and record it and the lessons being taught, our goal is to hopefully have the law offices of Fellerman and Saramboli, who spoke at our assembly, doing their prom promise. When they go to the local high schools and they keep that promise going, they have something to show. And that's how we kind of ended up here tonight. And I think there's, I want to do this. This is the last time I'm going to do this. I can do it once. Hopefully we'll get it right. But it's with the most sensitivity to the families, as they're going to be interviewed also in this documentary. And I hope that it's an opportunity for them to have an opportunity to remember their loved ones and tell about what great kids they were, because they're all great kids, But I'm sure the lesson they want to teach also is, hey, be careful in what you do, make good decisions.
People always try to put a spin on it. People always try to put a spin on it. Well, see, they did this or they did that. So therefore, I wouldn't do that. But I could always trying to look for that cut that corner where it'd be okay for me. And you know what? there are no shortcuts, there are no corners to cut. Anybody that gets behind the wheel that has been drinking, have no more guarantee than those 8 kids had. You could say, well, they were going very fast on that road. Right, but if somebody's had too much to drink, how do you know? Right, how do you know? And control of your car. So I think that what people are looking for doesn't exist, and that's a guarantee that you can do this and still be able to get away with it. There are no guarantees. And the more that people do it, the more that your odds go down. Because somebody could turn around and say, well, okay, you were lucky that night. And that's what it is, it's luck.
I would say typical students. Some were extremely high achievers. Lisa Mecca being one who I recall as being a really, really high achiever. Gail Velter was in a lot of my classes, and she was in a lot of the AP classes and advanced and really bright young girl. A lot of them were friends from Bell Mountain. Several grew up there. Michelle Sizik, Jody Haffage, they were Bell Mountain girls. They were close friends. But they were typical. They're people who hung out together and did things together.
And then you do it again. Well, now your odds, sooner or later, something terrible can happen.
I don't really think of it as luck. I think of it as chance, because no matter what, things can happen.
Sure, you're right. Yeah. And I think that's the one thing that people don't understand, that, you can't run that risk. There's no reason to run that risk. And I think today, and you're right, I think people still do it, but I think that the options and the education that people have received, that now comes into place sometimes too. Like where now somebody has to say, well, yeah, but where I think in years past, as I said to Mr. Kaz, it was almost like this rite of passage. It was almost, or even the way that society dealt with it. So and so, they got behind the wheel and they went, but they're a good guy. Well, they might be a good guy, but they got behind the wheel and they were drinking. They shouldn't have done that. So I think society doesn't give people the pass that maybe years ago it used to, and they were wrong to. I think society is like, no, that's not good. And I think when you look at, people like Mothers Against Drunk Driving, Students Against Destructive Decisions now. Wait a minute, no, you can't do that. You can't do that. You shouldn't do that.
It's just society has changed.
I really do. I think society has changed. And again, we're not batting 1,000, that.
Yeah.
But at least, I think we're making a dent. We're making a dent, and we're making people realize, whether, we're talking about young kids, as you said, older people. I think we look at the DUI, because my son's a state trooper, and he, well, I just had a few drinks. He pulled somebody over, and he said, well, you had a few too many. Well, can't you let me go? He's like, no, I'm not letting you go. No way I'm letting you go. And I refuse to let you go.
Even sitting here, I've seen people drink and drive before.
It's amazing, isn't it?
And it's not just kids, it's mostly adults too, because they still think it's
Mhm.
not, and me personally, I don't think it matters what age it is. I think it matters just that
Oh, you're right.
the local, their state of mind, their invulnerability that they think they have.
Sure. And the fact that I could do this, that superiority complex, oh, I could do this, I can do it. Well, wait a minute, and you've seen, I used to have a state trooper come in, and they had those beer goggles that you put on, and after they had a few drinks, and wait a minute, somebody gets behind the wheel of a car. That's what it is.
That's what it feels like.
Sure it is. That's what it is. So I think that superiority complex that people have, badly mistaken. Badly mistaken. So I think we're doing a much better job, much better job, but we can't rest on our laurels. We're not where we want to be yet. We want to be at that point where we want to bat 1,000. Now somebody might turn around and say, well, that'll never happen. Well, it'll certainly never happen, by us not doing anything. If we keep on plugging away at it, like we said, if there's a class of 30 kids in here, and there's 1 or 2 kids that walk out and it left a message for them. We want to get all 30. We want to get out, but if we didn't mention it at all, we don't get that 1 or 2.
Yeah.
And those 1 or 2, that's what I said before, if those 1 or 2 have younger brothers and sisters as they're coming up,
You can make an impact.
sure. And I'm sure that's what those 8 kids come back and say, definitely,
Even where I,
learn from us.
Yeah. When I first heard.
It was during Lent, and I was going to church. It was a Saturday morning. During Lent, I would go to Mass every morning. And I woke up for 6:30 Mass, and I was always a real reader of the newspaper. And the first thing I did is I went outside to grab the newspaper, and I looked at it, and the headline in the Scranton Tribune at the time said, 8 teens die in Mid-Valley crash. And stunningly to me, they were all named in that story. And you're thinking that an accident that happened at 11 o'clock at night, 6:30 at my doorstep, there was that level of detail. And I read the names, and then I went to church. And I came home and I woke up my dad and told him about it, and he and I took a ride up to Underwood Road, and we drove down and we saw the site of the accident.
And this might be not the easiest thing to talk about, but obviously you're there, you see the guardrail. Was the car at that time had probably been removed too?
Yes, I never saw the car.
Do you describe the thoughts and feelings that you experienced at that moment when you kind of got to the actual site? And this might not be the easiest question.
No, I think I was just stunned. I was just stunned to realize that it happened there. And when you saw that crinkled guardrail, you knew that there was something tragic had happened. I mean, that guardrail stayed here for years and years before PennDOT came in and replaced it. I remember being a college student petitioning PennDOT to come and take it down because I thought it was too painful to have to look at that guardrail every time you drove down the road. And in retrospect, I kind of wish they never took it down.
And why is that? Why would you want to leave it up?
I think it is the reminder that it happened. And I think that people can learn from that. That's always been my hope with this, that actually I would say that in anything that happens, you should walk away with an understanding that you can learn something. I can be better. I can change how I behave. And through the years, that was my hope, that would be the message.
Well, decisions, like, I know you're young, but you have to realize that the decisions you make today, if they're the wrong decisions or bad decisions, how they affect everyone, your parents, the community, just everybody. So before you make a decision like that to drink and drive or go with somebody that's been drinking, you better think twice.
And is there anything that you want to, any additional information you'd like to add? A story, something about Michael that you want to share?
No, not really, just for these kids to be aware of everything. I mean, these days, there's just so much you could get into, and I said, I don't believe kids think of the effect.
It's your high school, and you want to have a good time, and you want to enjoy this because you only get to go around once, and this is it. But at the same time, think about the fact of what you're doing. Think about your actions. Take care of one another. Look out for one another. Because when it's all said and done, when you're graduating, whatever that year might be, you want everybody up on that stage. Yeah. And when you look at the yearbook in years to come, you want all those pictures. Oh, you don't want anything like, And I think that's the one thing that you certainly, high school, we live for the moment, and you do everything because you do. I mean, this is your high school days. But at the same time, you have to have, a long-range view of it. And the long-range view is to look back on it and be able to smile, not look back on it and, have this feeling of like remorse.
You know what? One of the things that I have to say that stood out in my mind from that tragedy was that for whatever reason, where it happened on the road was kind of between downtown Troop and the school, and I always felt so terrible that for years after. They didn't replace the guardrail where the accident actually happened, and I always felt so sorry for poor Mrs. Mecca having to drive past that spot every day on her way to work. I could only imagine how she had to feel every time she drove by there.
Are you a parent? Do you have any kids?
Yeah, I have 4.
So
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you could relate then having to go through something like that.
Oh, yeah. As a parent, I guess even more so. Yeah.
All right, what are some positive memories that you have about the individuals, if we haven't already touched it?
It's so long ago, and I'm getting so old. I can't really remember too many details, other than the fact that I always felt that they were good kids that in no way deserved what happened to them. It made it more of a tragedy than it might have been otherwise.
Again, you have to think before you do things. You have to think about the repercussions, with yourself and, with your family, with your parents.
And if you gave a lesson to students today, what would that lesson be in this day and age?
Well, like what everybody is trying to stress right now, when you get to the prom season and you get to the graduation season, you have to stay away from, making the wrong decisions.
A few days, I guess, after the smoke started to clear, I took it on myself to go through the students' lockers. And quite honestly, I don't know why I did that, but I just thought it was something that I wanted to do. And so I went to all their lockers, and they all had textbooks in them. And you know how textbooks have the labels in with all the kids that had the books for the last 10 years. Sure. The names are in there. When I saw that, I thought, nobody really needs to see this. So I took all those books and down to the incinerator room, and I threw them in the fire. Well, whether I was right to do that or not, I don't know, but I did it.
As you were throwing those books away, was there any feelings that you felt?
Oh, yeah. I of course looked at each one as I was getting rid of them, and of course they had their names in. Their name was the last on the list of kids that had that book. And when I came to Dave Thomas's, because of the relation with the families and so on, was the only time that I cried during that whole situation. I just, so many memories came back of him and his mom and the other kids that I just couldn't help it, and I cried. And I also, besides the books that I burned, there were a couple of like sweaters and things of that nature that you would find in the locker. And some of the items I got to the families because I thought maybe they should have them and would want them. And then other things I just destroyed.
If you could say something to the students that were involved in that accident, if you could ever speak to them, what would you say to them? What would you ask?
If I could speak to those particular students? Mm-hmm. Well, if I could have talked to them before, I would have asked them to please don't drink. Now I guess you'd have to say you'd have to include doing drugs with that. They weren't as prevalent back at that time. Mm-hmm. And then especially, please don't drive or get in the car with somebody who's been drinking. Matter of fact, I used to get telephone calls years and years later. If a tragedy happened, it could have been in Colorado or it was that far away. People from the media would call me and ask me whether the kids in our school changed after the tragedy. And I wish I could say that they did, but in all honesty, except for the immediate time after the accident, I honestly don't think that kids have changed. I think they're still going to the same beer parties in the same place up on the same mountain as they always did, and that's how it's going to be. And I can't ever change that, and I don't think any of us can. And because of that, I changed my attitude about something. I really would recommend for parents to sit down with your kid and talk about the evils of drinking and doing drugs and talk about the bad things. But leave it open so that they would know that if they ever mess up and get in a jam, that they could call you to come and get them and bring them home and save the lecture for the next day when they're home safe and sound. And I would recommend that kids give your parents a chance to let that happen rather than make another mistake.
There were always kids in the school. One of them that you had mentioned, Larry Holiva, was very insistent on having a memorial of some sort set up for the kids. And, you know, we thought about it, but on the advice, you know, the staff, the state police, the local police, district attorney's office, their advice was that, you know, you don't really want to memorialize something that was involved with an illegal activity. Mm-hmm. But my thinking changed on that back in the late 90s and early 2000s when my son was a member of the school up here. And I remember going by the school, and when you got into the prom season and the graduation seasons, they always had a car out here.
Sure.
A car that, you know, shows how bad it can be, how, you know, quickly you can get killed in an accident. And when I saw that, I said, gee, you know, maybe we should have done something. You know, we should have done something with these kids. You know, and even now, I said, it would have been a really strong teaching tool, I think, if we had done something with that, along with the car that's out there. Mm-hmm. So I said, you know, we were opposed to it at that time, but I said, you know, I would certainly support something like that if someone wanted to go.
Every year on March 6th, I go to the store and I buy a dozen of flowers. I stop at the Dunmore Cemetery and I give one to Gail. I come up here on the road and I throw 8 flowers over the embankment while I'm listening to REO Speedwagon, because that was big in 1981. Keep on Loving You. And I would imagine that would have been on the radio in the car. Then I stop at Gail's mother's and I give her a flower. And then I go to the cemetery and I put one off for my brother, and now I put one off for my mother there.
I think we're done. Thank you for sharing.
This was Greg and Gail, 8 months before the accident. He was 16, she was 15. In the blink of an eye, they were gone.
Do you have some other photos there you'd like to show us?
In our yearbook, we have them.
Yeah, you have a dedication.
Yeah, I think somebody has a class of 82 and 83 yearbook. I let them borrow it. I gotta get it back from them.
They're in there.
This was November, right before the accident.
And that's Gail and Greg?
Yeah.
Who are they holding there?
Our daughter that was 5 months old when they died, who's now 37.
Yeah.
Christmas, 1980.
Probably about 3 months before the incident. Things that all kids want to do, you know?
Yep.
Spend time with their friends around the holidays.
Gail bought him his coat. He was very proud of that coat. I have his pants and his belt that he had on that night.
Thanks.
Our plan originally was that we would have this placed somewhere at the welcome of the school. But Lisa Mecca's mom was the secretary, and her office was right there. And we thought we didn't want her to have to come here every day and have to look at that and be reminded of it, even though you knew she'd be reminded anyway. You shouldn't need the plaque. And that delayed our presentation of this. And then through the years, it was in the basement of my mom and dad's home, and time just passed and we forgot about it. And when my folks moved about 2 years ago, my dad said, you know, you still have that plaque downstairs in the basement. And that was my reminder that we really need to get it here and get it in its rightful place.
So why do you have it, Larry, and how did it end up in your possession? When you say we, who are we talking about?
Oh, I was the president of the class of '83, and that was our gift back to the school at the time. It cost us about $700. We had it done at a local trophy shop, and we really wanted it to be something that remembered these 8 individuals.
How'd you go about fundraising, candy bar sales, things
No, it
like
was
that?
left over in our class treasury, and we did that through some of those traditional means.
Now, why do you think it wasn't put up? Was there something from the school, or the school kind of feels if like if we put this up, we would be condoning alcohol consumption, be setting a bad example? What were some of the things?
I don't think that was ever part of the thinking. The real reason for not putting up the time was the fact that Lisa's mom was working here, and now Lisa's sister works here. She's a teacher in the school district.
What's going to happen with this thing next?
I don't really know. I kind of think that's up to Nick and the school district. I'm hoping it gets a rightful place and people look at it as a reminder of what happened, but also a reflection on 8 people who were significant contributors and died way too early.